Good morning, Wanderers. Welcome back to Waylander's Wandering. Today we're going to be doing another skills to scale, and I would like to show you how I paint Horus Heresy era Thousand Sons Space Marines. So without further ado, let's get some paint on the brushes. As you can see, instead of the usual black, white or grey undercoat, I've chosen gold for these because I'm going to be actually painting these with what is called a contrast paint, which is a much thinner paint that will dip into the recesses and stain the top areas as we put it on. But because we're using the gold undercoat, it will give a rich metallic finish to anything we do. I will be using Blood Angel's Red contrast paint from Citadel for this, which can be and should be used straight from the pot. So let's try and get some paint on this wee fella and see how we end up. Don't forget, keep the paint moving. Make sure you get all the areas that you want covered. And because we're essentially going to be painting all of his armour with this red this time around, we will be covering pretty much the entire miniature. The only part I will probably miss here is his bolt gun. So I will get on with this and the rest of the squad and get back to you when that is done. As you can see, we've got some nice coverage with the red, and I've actually gone over it with a rattle can gloss varnish just to bring back the shine of the underlying metallic. The next stage will be to do a combined highlight and slight weathering on the edges of the armour here, where we will be using Ironbreaker from Citadel Colour as a silver metallic, just to go over the very edges of the armour. I've already got a little bit on my brush, and I've prepared some on the palette so it's slightly watered down. So on the edges of the armour, with a very slight kind of dab-in effect, just go on the edges and maybe a few very slight lines to represent chips in the paint. So dab, and don't go too overboard. Let's do some on the shoulder. So on the edges of the shoulder, the underside there, maybe a little on the other shoulder, but just a very subtle highlight and a few dots and dabs to represent where the armour may have taken damage over time. Maybe a little bit on the back of his hand here. So I will do this battle damage and highlighting effect across this guy and the rest of the squad, and probably the dreadnought as well, and then I will get back to you. With the subtle silver highlight complete, as you can see here, it's now time to start on the areas that are going to be metallic silver coloured, such as the blade on the bayonet there, the barrel of the gun, magazine on his weapon, and the black areas such as the undersuit of his armour, which can be seen between the panels there. And there are going to be some metallic areas on these vents as well that we're going to do as well. To achieve this, we're going to start off with a base coat of Citadel Corvus Black, which is actually much more of a dark grey than an actual black. But that will give the desired effect in all of these recesses and areas that we want. I've already prepared some on my palette, so we'll just get straight in with the brushes. In these areas, inside these little vents here, on these areas that we're going to finish painting silver, and basically all over. As you can see, this isn't covering in a single coat, which is only to be expected, but as we all know, two thin coats are better than one thick one. So I'll get back to you when I've done this guy and the rest of the miniatures. As you can see, we've now gone over all the areas that are going to be either black and the finished model or a metallic silvery colour. And it's now time to actually put on that metallic silver. So areas like the magazine of the weapon, the barrel and bayonet there, and vents on his backpack will all now get a coat of Citadel Lead Belcher, which I've already prepared on my palette. So a slightly thinned down version of Lead Belcher is now going to go on these areas. So being careful not to get any on any areas that you don't want the silver on, or you've already completed. We will now pop some of this on here, and this is the time where we can be extra careful, and if we're careful here we won't get any in that little recess, and which will give us an instant shade. Not too much on the brush there. There we go, better. Being careful not to get too much paint on your brush at any one time, because we want to maintain control of this paint so that it doesn't flow over areas we've already painted. And we will now carefully finish this off. And if, like here, we see we've flooded the area a little bit much, what we can do is clean the brush off, and using our cleaned brush, lift some of the paint back off so that the areas of shade show up again. So I'll get on with this and get back to you as soon as I've done. And with all these metallic silvery pieces complete on the weapon, armour strapping, vents, grenades, etc., it is now time to finish off the final base coats, which will be Ulthuan Grey on his weapon casing, some kind of parchment shade on the scrolls on here, and around this side on his holster I will probably go for Mournfang Brown on there, and there's the Ulthuan Grey that we're going to paint on his weapon casing. To get those done, and then we will decide whether we're going to have a final shade. So I will prepare a little paint for this on my palette here. So get some paint out, which is quite thick and goopy, so we will definitely need to thin this down somewhat. Get that on there. Control the amount of paint we actually have on the brush, and just on the areas of the weapon casing here we'll get a nice thin coat of the Ulthuan Grey. Being very careful not to get any onto his armour or any of the silvery parts we've just completed. Remembering, of course, that if it doesn't cover first time, that's okay, because we can always put a second thin coat on. So being very careful on all of these parts, we will get the Ulthuan Grey on. Lovely. So I will get this guy finished, along with the rest of the squad and any parts on the Dreadnought we decide to do, and I'll get right back to you. Now that we've done the Ulthuan Grey on the gun casing, and we've painted in the scrolls and leatherwork there, and of course the holster, what we're going to do is quickly go over these areas with a null oil wash, just to pick out the shade areas, and we'll also go over the metallic areas at the same time, just to give this a little bit of depth and shade, after which, because this takes around an hour to dry, so we'll leave it for the time necessary, and then have a look to see if we can get away with that highlight. So I will shade all of these bits that I've just gone over, just keeping it away from the red and black areas, and I'll do this on this guy and everyone else in the squad, and then I shall get back to you. So all that shade is now nicely done, which has given some depth to the grey gun casing and the metallic areas. Also this scroll on his belt and everything, and it is brought out some highlights and shade areas on the holster. So all in all, I am going to call this guy finished. The only thing left to do would be to put a chapter marking transfer on the shoulder plate, which I will do in a little while before I put them and before I do my thing at the end, and to base them, which I will, well, as always, I will do to match the rest of my army. So with that in mind, I will get this base done, stick a transfer on, and then I will bring you back in to have a final look and say, oh, tell a lie, we've missed something. I haven't done the islanders on his helmet. So to do these islanders, it's going to be a two-stage process. Okay, stage one is to get a fairly clean brush with a good point on it, and very gently paint across the centre of the lens, just like this, and again on the other lens, just to give us something to go on to. So after doing this, we will go on to all the rest of the troops. So again, same technique, very gently in the eye lens area, making sure that we're very careful we don't get anywhere else. And as you can see, more than happy to turn your guy upside down to paint in the other eye lens. A little bit more paint. And yes, I know I'm using it straight out of the pot, but hey, it needs to cover in one go because I really don't want to do the multiple layers in here. So again, that one's a little bit big I think we'll get away with it. So I'll do that to the rest of them and quickly come back in and basically dot the I's. As you can see, I've filled in a dab on the eye socket with some of that Corax white that I did the grey areas with before. So now what we're going to do is put a smallest drop of Warpstone Glow, which is a nice contrast to the red, into that eye socket to give the eye lenses that little tiny bit of pop. There we go. And as you can see, that looks kind of cool. So as I said before, I'll do that to the rest of these guys, all of those chaps, and the Dreadnought, whose ankles you can just see in the background there. Then I'll base them, then I'll stick them on the turntable, and we'll come through to my final thoughts on the paint job. And there we have it, my first squad of Thousand Sons Heresy era Marines done, along with the Contempt and Dreadnought. I quite like the look of them, and I think that the painting technique will work on, well, if it works on the Dreadnought and the troops, it should work on all Marines, including special characters and things that you want a bit more detail on, and hopefully on larger vehicles, tanks and troop transports as well. But what have we learned during this painting process? Well, for one thing, my main takeaway from this is do not use gloss varnishes from a rattle can. They stink. They absolutely stink. And in the UK right now, it's a little bit warm and humid, so these guys still feel slightly sticky even a week after I finish them. Well, finish the varnish, that is. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you find that the details in it very useful. Thank you for staying till the end. You've been absolutely fantastic. I've been Waylander 101. I love your faces. Thank you, and goodbye.